Welcome and hi everyone. Today I would like to share with all of you about the economic background of Zimbabwe. First of all, Zimbabwe is one of the countries located in Southern Africa and formally granted independence on 18 April 1980 by the British government. The country covers an area of 390,750 square kilometer with total population of 170,20321 people in 2024. Zimbabwe, also known as Rhodesia or Southern Rhodesia. Besides, Zimbabwe is strategically located since the country shares border with Mozambique, Zambia, Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa. When we talk about Zimbabwe, the first thing that will come to our mind is inflation. This is because Zimbabwe have been suffered by this economic problem almost 4 decades until now. So what is inflation? Generally, inflation is defined as a rise in the overall level of price for goods and service resulting in decrease in the buying power of currency. However, Zimbabwe not only faced with inflation but extremely rapid inflation, which is in other words known as hyperinflation. So, what causes that make Zimbabwe face hyperinflation? What trigger that make Zimbabwe, the country rich of agriculture, to suffer with economic downturn? So, let's proceed to find out about it.
As you can see in the slide, this is data inflation for 10 years in Zimbabwe. The trend in Zimbabwe inflation rate from 2013 to 2022 shows extreme volatility and hyperinflation. In 2013, inflation was 1.63%. This was relatively low compared to subsequent years. In 2014, inflation decreased to negative 0.2%, indicating slight deflation. The deflation worsened significantly to negative 2.43% in 2015 and still remained negative at 1.54% in 2016. After that, in 2017, inflation returned to positive territory at 0.89%, but still relatively low. There was a dramatic increase in 2018 to 10.62%, marking the beginning of severe inflationary pressure. But suddenly, in 2019, inflation skyrocketed to 255.3%, reflecting the onset of hyperinflation, and this situation continues and become worsened dramatically, reaching 557.2% in 2020. In 2021, inflation started decrease to 89.55%, still very high but a notable decrease from the previous year. Lastly, in 2022, inflation further decreased to 104.71%, showing some stabilization but still at very high levels.
Next, we move to analyze the trend of data. First and foremost, in 2013, the rate of inflation in Zimbabwe country is 1.63%, and there was increased by negative 2.09% from 2012. For years, Zimbabwe has struggled with hyperinflation. A number of causes, including excessive money printing, poor economic management, and political unrest, combined to cause this economic disaster. According to data from 2014, Zimbabwe inflation rate is negative 0.20%. There was an increase of negative 1.85% from inflation rate in 2013. It is because of negative trade when the amount of money leaving the country exceeds the amount coming in, leading to a cash shortage. In 2014, Zimbabwe export commodities valued at 3,872 million USD and import items at 6,070 million USD. Zimbabwe is ill-equipped to handle this issue. Also, because of Zimbabwe's economic collapse, the International Financial Fund and the World Bank have suspended the country's credit program, and they are not permitted to extend loans from them. Next, the country of Zimbabwe experienced a negative 2.43% inflation rate in 2015. Between 2014 and 2015, there was a negative 2.23% difference. The severe level of inflation witnessed during the peak of hyperinflation were lessened after the Zimbabwean dollar was reintroduced and stabilization efforts were implemented. But the economy's biggest worry was still inflation. Furthermore, according to data from 2016, Zimbabwe inflation rate has increased by negative 2.23%, which is the rate of inflation on 2016 is negative 1.54%. The trend of data inflation in Zimbabwe in 2016 was characterized by persistent inflationary pressure stemming from currency dynamics, fiscal challenge, adverse weather conditions, and policy constraints. Despite efforts to stabilize the economy, inflation remained a significant challenge, undermining economic stability and exacerbating social hardship. Inflation in Zimbabwe was 0.89% in 2017, compared to a 2.43% drop the year before. Even though inflation fluctuated in size throughout the year, Zimbabwe was nevertheless under pressure to control inflation. There was swing in Zimbabwe inflation in 2017. Price increases were interspersed with very low inflation. For civilians and policymakers alike, inflation remained a constant worry even if the nation did not face hyperinflation as it had in the past.
Next is 2018. In 2018, Zimbabwe's inflation rate was 10.62%. There was an increase of 9.73% over 2017. Product and service shortage resulted from government policies that disrupted agriculture, productivity and supply chains such as price control and land reform. Also, inefficiency and corruption impeded investment and economic growth, increasing inflationary pressure. Next, the rate in 2019 was 255.3%, representing a little change and a 254.68% rise over the previous year. This occurred after 10 years of using foreign currency. The Zimbabwean dollar was reintroduced in June 2019, which resulted in currency devaluations and instability. Challenges for the new currency include lack of confidence, limited proposals, and concern about the government's ability to manage its value effectively. Inflationary pressure and rising import goods prices are a result of this drop. Followed by 2020, the inflation rate rose to 557.2% due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The difference between 2020 and 2019 is 301.9%. The COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in higher unemployment, higher inflation, lower GDP growth rate, and more strain on Zimbabwe's health delivery system. This pandemic affected livelihoods, the country's economy, and the provision of essential services, which contributed to Zimbabwe's rising inflation rate. Furthermore, in 2021, the inflation rate will fall to 98.55%, a difference of 458.65% for the previous year. Improved agriculture production is one of the reasons why inflation has decreased this year. The reason for this is that favorable weather in 2021 increased agriculture production, particularly for large crops such as corn. Increased food production helped reduce food shortage and minimize upward pressure on food price, which are a major source of inflation in Zimbabwe. Lastly, for 2022, between 2021 and 2022, the inflation rate grew by 6.16%. This is because Zimbabwe stopped printing its own money and used foreign currency. Zimbabwe said in mid-2050 that it would entirely change to US dollars before the end of the year. In 2022, the Zimbabwe's dollar value fell by 521% against the US dollar from 108 in January to 671 in December. This is why Zimbabwe has the highest inflation rate and will be the most affected country in 2022.
Apart from that, this comprises the types of government budget in Zimbabwe. The government's budget is an in-depth analysis of the money received by government as well as the payments made by government. While the budget deficit-inflation relationship is not always evident, Zimbabwe's experience with both high inflation rates and budget deficit since independence makes for an interesting case study in the relationship between the two key indicators. From 2013 to 2019, the Zimbabwean government experienced a budget deficit. The budget deficit is the amount by which total government expenditures exceed total government revenues. High budget deficit is contributed to greater challenges in raising funds to finance expenditure than those with lower deficits. In 2020, Zimbabwe's GDP is 1.13, which is positive and the only budget surplus from 2013 to 2022. Zimbabwe's budget deficit increased from 2013 to 2022, reached negative 0.77% of GDP in 2022. Despite significant fluctuations in recent years.
Next, the Zimbabwean government has introduced two policies with the objective of achieving full employment, price stability, and higher economic growth. The first one is monetary policy with the goal of stabilizing inflation levels, among others. Zimbabwe government massive money printing costing over 20 million a month led to an increase in circulation, subsequently causing a sharp price increase. Therefore, the second one is fiscal policy, which regulates government spending, taxation, and public debt to influence economic condition. Fiscal policy might be extremely important in order to promote sustainable development and stabilize the economy.
Now I will present about the causes of inflation in Zimbabwe. There are three types of inflation, which are monetary inflation, cost-push inflation, and demand pull inflation. So the first one is monetary inflation. Monetary inflation occurs when the amount of money in circulation increases faster than the economy's production of goods and services. This causes a general rise in prices over time because the purchasing power of the currency declines, meaning each unit of currency buys fewer goods and services. This typically happens when the central bank prints more money, expands credit, or lowers interest rates, leading to an excess supply of money. In Zimbabwe, monetary inflation resulted from excessive money printing by the Reserve Bank to finance a large budget deficit and pay off domestic debt, especially during the early 2000s. As more coins and notes were issued, the Zimbabwean dollar depreciated, leading to hyperinflation by 2008, with prices doubling almost daily. This caused an excess of money compared to available goods, decreasing their currency's value. As people lost confidence in Zimbabwe's currency, it worsened the hyperinflation crisis. Thus, they turned to foreign currencies like the US dollar and South African rand. The local currency's value and usefulness declined due to this shift. For example, during Zimbabwe's hyperinflation crisis, the Reserve Bank printed $100 trillion banknotes, which were still not enough to buy a loaf of bread. The government tried to combat inflation with new currency versions like bearer checks and agro checks, but these measures failed. In 2009, Zimbabwe abandoned its local currency and switched to foreign currencies to stabilize the economy. Next is cost-push inflation. Cost-push inflation occurs when general price levels rise due to increased production costs. These costs can include higher prices for raw materials, wages, energy, and transportation. When production costs go up, business often pass these costs on to consumers, resulting in higher prices for goods and services. This type of inflation reduces the value of money, making goods and services more expensive. In Zimbabwe, cost-push inflation was largely driven by the land reform program in the early 2000s, which forcibly transferred land from commercial farmers to others. This led to a sharp decline in agriculture yields, raising food prices. Although the land seizures aimed to correct historical injustice, they were poorly organized and decreased agricultural productivity. The collapse of the agriculture sector caused food shortage, lower export earning, and worsened the economic downturn by reducing investor confidence. Next, political instability and human rights violation led to restrictions that made importing products and raw material expensive. Inefficient government policies and corruption also increased production inefficiencies, raising production costs. These higher costs were then passed on to consumers, thus increasing the rate of inflation. The diagram shows cost-push inflation in Zimbabwe in light of the fact that high production costs trigger high prices and less production.
Next, demand pull inflation is the situation whereby the total purchasing power in an economy expands beyond the capability of producing goods and services. This type of inflation may occur when there is increase in customer expenditure, government expenditure, investment by companies, and export. However, in Zimbabwe, demand pull inflation play a less prominent but still significant role. This is because government spending and aid inflows increase consumer spending. For example, an increase in the wage of civil servants. However, Zimbabwe has not been able to achieve higher production capacity due to some challenges. This implies that even if demand increases, supply cannot keep up with it, thus causing an increase in the price of goods and services. This put further pressure on inflation as the economy is unable to respond adequately to increase in demand. As you look at the diagram above illustrates demand pull inflation in Zimbabwe, showing how increased aggregate demand leads to higher price when the economy cannot produce enough goods and services to meet this demand.
In conclusion, Zimbabwe is among the countries where inflation has persisted for more than a decade. Inflation is typically caused by factors within the country such as excessive money printing, land reform program, isolation from global financial system, economic sanctions, and lack of trust in the Zimbabwean dollar. Also, it classified as monetary inflation, cost-push inflation, and demand-pull inflation. Furthermore, inflation have an effect on Zimbabwe. The authorities of that country should constantly monitor the issue and look for solutions. It is evident that Zimbabweans' money is worthless for fulfilling their requirements and purchasing food. This burdens the citizens as well as the country itself. For example, they need to carry a lot of cash even if it's just for a few items or just a bread. Then, because no other country wants to invest in them or collaborate with them, the country is unable to grow economically. It is because they don't see the point in investing if the bulk of the earnings is going to be eaten out by inflation. Besides, Zimbabwe is a country where inflation has made it less competitive than other nations. Zimbabwe's inflation problem may be overcome if the government develops a sound plan and strategy. Otherwise, Zimbabwe will have to endure suffering and poverty in the years to come.